Alright, what is going on, everybody? And welcome to Bushwackers Breakdown. And this is going to be a podcast where I basically go over the episodes of the Bushwackers. And since season 1 has just concluded a few weeks ago, I'm going to discuss all the episodes from The Terror Below to The Hermit at the Top of the World. So, sit back, relax, enjoy, and remember to like, comment, subscribe. It definitely helps a lot. And I will be releasing a video shortly, going over the different stages of the Bushwackers universe. I mean, because if Kevin and James can go over their phases and their chapters, then why can't I go over the phases or chapters with stages? I mean, come on. So let's dive in. So, the first episode of season 1 was The Terror Below, and I just want to let y'all know, when it comes to writing, I always start in medias res, or in the middle of things. So, it's a bit difficult for me to write a pilot. I always like to start in the middle, because for me, it's much easier to just write stories where everything has been established and then kind of work my way backwards. That's usually my writing process. So for me, The Terror Below was one of those episodes where it took me a long time, probably a year and a half, to sort of figure out like what would be the best episode to introduce the Bushwackers. And once that was done, I sort of waffled a little bit as to what I wanted the guys to do. What would be their first challenge? And I figured, well, nothing says a huge challenge like facing a huge monster. So that's where I started off. But we'll dive a little further into it. But let's go ahead and get started with the origins of the Bushwackers. So, when I came up with the Bushwackers, it was sometime around 2017, and this was when I was working at State Farm. And, me being the genius that I am, I decided to base it on the three people I knew. Myself, my friend Lee, and this guy that we worked with, John Armstrong, who's the younger brother of a classmate of ours from high school. And the idea pretty much came from the Goodies, which was this show on the BBC back in the 70s about three guys, Tim, Graham, and Bill, who played fictional versions of themselves, and they started a business called the Goodies, where they would do any job, anywhere, anytime. So, I thought that was a good premise for the Bushwackers, but I sort of tweaked it a little bit, because obviously, being creative, you take something that exists and you just tweak it a little bit, dial it up to 11, kind of put your own spin on it. So obviously the biggest influence would be the MCU, particularly the Avengers, because the decade from 2010 to 2018 was the decade of the Avengers. This was when the MCU was at its peak popularity. Unlike today, where everybody, if a Marvel movie comes out, they're like, that's alright, whatever, cool. I still haven't seen Ant-Man and the Wasp: Quantumania, just so you know. So, and I honestly don't know if I have the intent on seeing it, but getting back to the main thing. So to go back to the Goodies, the thing about that show was that it was unique to me because not only was it about three guys who were willing to do any job, but it was the fact that they were fictional versions of the writers and creators of the show. And furthermore, there was this mix of the weird and the normal, if that makes sense, because I remember there was one episode called Kitten Kong where the goodies had to take down this giant kitten that was destroying London. And then there was another episode where they were working as beefeaters. And then there was another episode where they were supposed to babysit this kid who was a complete psychopath. And I was like, wow, that is really, really amazing. It was influential to me because at that time I thought, I was at that time where I thought, wow, nothing's better than Monty Python, because Python was the gold standard for anybody, really. Anybody who wanted to work in comedy, animation, or film, they took their cue from Monty Python, and rightly so, because Python was and is a tremendous influence. But everybody forgets that the goodies were contemporaries of the Pythons, because Tim Brooke Taylor, Bill Oddie, and Graham Garden, I think it's Graham Garden, they all went to Cambridge. And I think Tim Brooke Taylor and Bill Oddie were classmates of John Cleese. So for me, I thought, wow, like these guys were amazing, because the goodies gets a bad rep as a kid's show, but I mean, it's like the cartoons from the 1990s. I mean, as a kid you enjoy them, but when you watch them as an adult, it's even better. And for me, watching the goodies was like, wow, this is amazing. This is hilarious what these guys are doing. So I definitely took the idea, the concept of what the goodies were doing, and just ran with it. So you have that, and then the Three Stooges, is another thing too. But to go back to the goodies, and I should be a bit more organized about this, and I'm sorry, but another thing about the goodies that just stood out to me was the fact that each guy had a delineated role. So Tim was the fop. He was the dandy. He was the quote-unquote leader of the group. Graham was, the mad scientist, and he sort of did his own thing, and he looked a certain way, and he was pretty content with it. And Bill was the young guy who was hip and cool, and he could connect with all the kids, but he was also the muscle of the group. So, again, being the genius that I was, I decided to take that and apply it to the Bushwackers. So Lee obviously is the leader of the group, the nominal leader of the group. I'm the mad scientist, and JJ is the young man who pretty much gets shit on a lot. He's made to do all the manual stuff because the other two just feel like taking a dump on him. Not literally, but figuratively. So, I mean, gosh, I could talk about the goodies for hours. They're such a huge influence, and it's a tremendous shame that not many people know too much about them, because they, I mean, to me, I think they were the balance to Python, really. I mean, Python was great. Don't get me wrong, I love those guys, but the goodies, the goodies brought their own sense of cool. They brought their own style to comedy. I mean, if Python was this intellectual, let's tell jokes in Latin and let's have, the philosophical football game. The goodies were, well, we're gonna have a pop song, every episode, and we'll hit each other with sausages, and we'll dress up as beefeaters, and we'll take down aliens and robots. I mean, I thought that's the coolest thing ever. I definitely recommend y'all watch the goodies, because they're phenomenal. They really, really are. The second influence, I mentioned it already, was the Marvel Cinematic Universe, and the Avengers in particular. And the thing about the Marvel Cinematic Universe that stood out, was the fact that it was expansive. It was the fact that you had this entire universe. And being a comic book fan, I read comic books religiously as a kid, probably more so than I did the Bible, and I went to Catholic school. So, so with the Marvel Cinematic Universe and comic books, in general, they tend to have this huge scope that just makes you think, wow, like, this is pretty expansive. There are just so many elements going into it. You just don't know what to do. That's why it was a smart thing to kind of concentrate on different different aspects of the universe first, and sort of like grow and expand it over time. But the thing that I really liked about the Marvel universe was the fact that you had pretty cool heroes and pretty cool villains. For me, with the Bushwackers, it was never about having, these three guys develop superpowers, because for me, I think that's a Deus Ex Machina. I think that's a cop out, really. It's so simple to just say, oh well, these are three ordinary guys that got doused with, I don't know, chemicals, and instead of developing cancer, they now have superpowers. I think that's lazy writing, to be honest with you. I think it's much more funnier and much more clever and much more challenging, really, to just have these three ordinary guys who are just trying to run a business come face to face with these monsters and these gods and superpower villains, and try to figure out how are we going to defeat them, because these things are in our way to trying to make money. So I'll probably flesh that out a little bit more, but but the Marvel Cinematic Universe for me, was a huge influence into that. The third would be the Three Stooges, and we're dipping way back into my childhood, because my dad and I didn't get along very much when I was growing up, but we did love the Three Stooges, so we would just sit there together on the couch and we would watch that. And the thing that I really loved about the Stooges was the fact that these are like, three of the least glamorous looking people you've ever seen. There's nothing sexy about them, there's nothing appealing about them, but they had such a distinct look that, that now if you were to show it to someone on the street, they would know, oh, that's the Three Stooges, because you got Moe's bowl haircut, you've got Larry's frizzy side hair, and then Curly with his bald scalp, and that sort of played a role in how I wanted to design the characters, because each one should have a distinct look that I would, that people would say, oh, that's the Bushwhackers. So obviously you got Lee with his goatee and his t-shirt, and his sort of dark gray t-shirt that says fluent in movie quotes. Doesn't say it all the time on the t-shirts, but it's implied. And then you've got me with the Van Dyke beard, the square glasses, and the rugby shirt, because I developed an unhealthy obsession with rugby shirts probably 3 years ago, and it hasn't stopped. And then you've got JJ, who's got his dark brown hair and his teal polo shirt, because honestly I was trying to think of like the best color to for a polo shirt that would make you stand out, and I thought, teal. Nobody wears a teal polo shirt, so we'll just have him wear that and kind of go from there. So that's so those three, I guess you could say, shows or franchises. Those are the three that sort of help lay the foundation for for what will be the Bushwhackers. So, what's in the name? So, when I originally conceived of the Bushwhackers, I didn't call them the Bushwackers. I originally wanted to call them the Quark Brothers, because I had seen Thor Ragnarok, and I thought, oh, Quark's a pretty cool guy. How about call them the Quark Brothers? But for legal reasons, I just thought, I don't know, that might be too much of a hassle to deal with. And then the next name I came up with was the Duffer Brothers. And originally I thought of Duffer because a long time ago I read the Chronicles of Narnia book, The Voyage of the Dawn Treader. And there's a chapter where they land on an island full of monopods, and they're called the Duffel, or the Duffers. And then they're the Duffer Puzz and the Duffel Puzz. So I was like, oh, that'd be a nice callback, a nice literary callback. We'll just call them the Duffer Brothers. But I decided against it just because I thought it was too silly. And thinking on it now, I'm kind of glad I didn't go with the Duffer Brothers, because apparently there are these two brothers from Durham called the Duffer Brothers, and they make a show called Stranger Things, which is popular for some weird reason. So I can imagine if I called it the Duffer Brothers and they got wind of it, it'd be pretty interesting for them to come all the way down from Durham or California all the way to Charlotte and be like, hey, so you made a show about us? You're using our names? What the fuck, bro? So I decided to not go with that. But then, so I was kind of stuck trying to figure out, well, what am I going to call these guys? Because I sort of have the basic idea of what they are. They're three guys who form a business, who are trying to make money doing whatever job they can, and whatever job they're doing, they end up, in a lot of shit because the challenge is ridiculously challenging, like fighting a giant worm. And I was watching an episode of the Grand Tour where they were in Namibia, and it was part 2 called, I think it was like the Beach Buggy Boys. And they went to a shop called Bushwackers. And I thought, that's a pretty interesting name. So I just did a Google search to see if there were any groups called Bushwackers, and I think there was like a wrestling team out of Australia called Bushwackers, but it's spelled the conventional way with an H. So I, being the genius that I am, I just took the H out and I was like, oh, we'll just call it Bushwackers and we'll go from there. And so far I haven't heard a peep from anybody, so we'll just go with that and just see what people think. But so far, I mean, I haven't, but so far I'm pretty happy with it. Although I will say that when I think of Bushwackers, my mind constantly goes back to the idea that people might get the misconception that it might be a sex club. And I think it might be because of bush, and then whacking, or whackers, like whacking. You can sort of see where I'm going here. So, so that part I was a little bit conscious about, but I figured, you know what? It's a great name. I think it's funny. I think it's cool, and we'll just insert little references to sex maniacs and sex clubs and just go from there. So all right. So now I want to talk about production. So once I had the idea, once I had the name, once I had like the general MO of what was going on, I had to figure out what I wanted to do, production-wise. Now the biggest thing for me was trying to find the right software to for drawing, and a lot of articles online go and say, well, you should definitely look at Photoshop. Photoshop is like the best thing to work with. And I agree, it is. But for me, Photoshop there just seems to be a huge learning curve when it comes to working with Photoshop, and it takes a while to sort of figure that out. I remember back in the early 2010s, I think 2012 or 13, I was taking a GIS class, a Geographic Information Science class, and we were working with AutoCAD. And I was just Googling, about AutoCAD. I just wanted to learn more about it, and I found out there was Autodesk Sketchbook, and at that time, Sketchbook was free to download. So I downloaded it, and it's a really, really, really simple software to use. I adore it. I know there are other digital artists out there who are like, well, you could be doing something better. I mean, I tried Corel Paint for a while, and I mean, to say I was disappointed is an understatement. I did not like Corel Painter at all. And to make things worse, it would just take a long time to load, and every time I would try to use it, it was just frustrating. I mean, Autodesk Sketchbook, is responsive. It's very easy to figure out. I mean, there's really nothing to it. You just pick what sort of brush you want to use and just go with it. And for me, that was that was the software I ended up using, and I still use today because it's just so ridiculously simple, and I can get a lot out of it. So I think now you have to pay for it. I paid like $20 for it now because you used to be able to download it for free, but I mean, $20 and it's yours from the Microsoft store. I mean, it's not bad. The next thing the next thing after that was editing. And that's where Photoshop comes in. Originally, I wanted to use, that's because being a cheapskate that I am, I wanted to just use GIMP, which is sort of like Photoshop, but it's like a poor man's version of it. And I've had some pretty good results with it because I made a few test projects just to see how it went, but I felt limited. I felt like I wasn't really getting as much as I wanted out of the product. So I bit the bullet and I got Adobe Photoshop. And for me, if if someone were to ask, what's the one Adobe product you would recommend? Obviously, I'm going to say Photoshop because it's such a versatile tool. I mean, I mainly use it for two things. I mainly use it to edit the images or the cartoons that I've drawn, and I use it for video editing. So in the first part with editing, in Sketchbook, what I would do is I would draw a bunch of panels, put in the illustrations, and color it. I would then transfer it to Photoshop, and I would have two windows. And the first window would be the panels, and then the second window would be the background. So I would have a background layer, and then what I would do is I would go to the first panel, I would cut the image and paste it on there to sort of correspond with the actions being described or the line of dialogue. And I would sort of repeat that process, and I would look at the script, obviously, while I'm working on that until I have the complete story to my satisfaction. And then from there, I would open the video timeline, and then I would edit it. And what I've done in terms of production is I would always do the drawings first. Well, I should go even further back. I would write the script, but that goes without saying. I would write the script first, do the drawings, record the audio, and then Lee would record his dialogue. And what I would do is I would edit the audio first, just to make sure that the narration and the lines of dialogue all match up. I would then go in and put in the sound effects, and for the sound effects, I just use Pixabay. I use Pixabay when it comes to sound effects, and I have it stored in the folder, so it's just there ready to go. So I put in the sound effects first, and what I try to do is I try to be minimalistic when it comes to sound effects. I don't want to have too much, but I don't want to have too little either. I kind of want to have like a happy medium. Well, I guess that wouldn't make me a minimalist, but I don't want to have too much going on in terms of the audio, because I feel that would take away from the story, overall. So once I've put in the audio sound effects, and I'm happy with where they are, the next thing I do is put in the music. And surprisingly enough, the music takes the longest time, because I'm always trying to figure out like what's the best music to match the scene. Now, if you watch the episodes, you'll notice that most of it is jazz, jazz influence, or they're jazz in nature, and that's because I generally like jazz music, but because a lot of my favorite shows also use a lot of jazz, like Cowboy Bebop, for instance, or Archer. I mean, a lot of the incidental music is just is jazz based, so I just figured I'd go for that. And once I've taken care of the audio, once I figured out the music, and once all that's done, I then go in and insert all the images, and that doesn't take very long, because what I do is I always like to just block out the I guess the dialogue boxes, or whatever they are, for lack of a better word. And then from there I would just just put in the images, and they just fit in, and they just fit in like slots, really. They just fall right into place. And from there, if everything looks good, I just export as a video, and then I upload it on Monday. So that's pretty much my production process, and it just repeats over and over again. Where it can get a little complicated is if it's a 4-parter or 6-parter episode, where you sort of have to work overtime to try to make sure you get all these parts, ready for upload, and that can take a while. The biggest production nightmare was when I was working on the Emerald Curse special for Thanksgiving, and that took quite a long time to just get all the dialogue, to get all the pieces in place, because sometimes Photoshop will just sort of slow down, and that can sort of set you back. So that, and it's so that's one of the few times where I've sort of found myself in production hell. But generally, I enjoy working on it, just because it kind of gives me it kind of creates this rhythm and flow, because I am a creature of habit. So I kind of, so having this flow, having this rhythm to work with, kind of, it gives you this sense of rhythm, this sense of, what to expect, this sense of familiarity, so you're not caught off guard. So that's pretty much how production works. All right, so jumping into episode 1, the Terror Below. So, like I said before, I'm really, really bad when it comes to writing pilots. I always like to start in the middle of the series and kind of work my way backwards. So, this one took me a long time in terms of production, because I had to figure out like what kind of art style I wanted. And originally, I wanted to do something elaborate. I was tremendously influenced by comic book art from the 1990s, but after realizing I'm going to have to draw like this for many episodes, I just stripped it down and tried to make it as simple as possible. And I had never driven on a tablet before, so it was a bit of a learning experience for me. But after a while, I began to feel a bit more comfortable about how I wanted to design the characters, how I wanted the scenes to look, what kind of colors would best go with that. It was pretty much just familiarizing myself with working with the tablet, working with Autodesk Sketchbook, working with Adobe Photoshop, and just putting it all together. I was a film major, but I was more familiar with camera work than I was with this. I guess you could call it animation, sort of. They're not really moving around, but I guess digital storytelling, I guess that's the best way to describe it. But when it came to the story itself, I definitely wanted the episode to sort of reflect the theme of the series going forward. Now, when we start off, the Bushwackers are just setting up their business. It's early 2017. And the guys can't figure out what they want to be. Are they contractors? Are they guns for hire? What are they? So, as a sensible move, they decide, what, we'll just advertise ourselves as contractors, because everybody needs a contractor, right? Who's going to need, mercenaries in the city of Charlotte? And if you are working as a mercenary, that might actually raise some red flags. So, we'll just be contractors. We'll go to people's homes and fix things, and that'll be it. And there's nothing out of the ordinary. It's pretty innocuous. But but where things get a little bit weird is when we find out that an entire town has been destroyed, and nobody knows what's causing this destruction. So the army comes in, and they help out with sorting people out, and they go down and they investigate, and they find caverns full of eggs, and they get attacked and mutilated. And we come to find out that the perpetrator is the Carolina ghost worm. Now, where did I get that idea from? Well, mainly it's from the Carolina ghost pepper, really. I just thought, you know what? We'll be even funnier than a Carolina ghost pepper. I know, Carolina ghost worm, because nobody's ever heard of that, so we'll just go with that. So I decided. So and it's a fairly, I think it's a fairly innocuous thing, because there's nothing really special about a giant worm apart from it being a giant worm. So basically, I set that as the quote unquote villain of the episode, and it kind of reminds me of that Star Trek the original series episode where Kirk and Spock find out that this thing that's been attacking the miners was actually a worm trying to protect its young. So I was like, oh, okay, so we'll have something like that, but it's a giant, albino worm that just pops out of the ground and destroys things. So the Bushwackers are completely unaware of what's going on. They're just there to do a job, but they do notice like a bunch of giant holes in the ground, and they begin to wonder, well, isn't this a bit freaky? Where are these giant holes coming from? What's this chitinous shell? What's up with all this slime? So naturally, we climb down into the hole, and we find the same thing, and we find JJ stuck in the slime. And as we're pulling him out, you begin to see, what's going on with all these eggs? And the eggs open up kind of like what you would see in Alien, and the guys get out. And can I just say that at this point in the writing process, it's still up in the air as to where I want the Bushwhackers to go, but but in terms of figuring things out, I kind of since I've sort of casted myself as the mad scientist of the group, I decided, what, I just happen to know these weird things, and I know that we're gonna need a few things here and there to sort of defeat this monster. Because why not? I mean, I guess we can't escape the whole Deus Ex Machina thing, but I figured, it's much easier and much more acceptable to make a character clever than to have them super powered. So that's what I went with. So while my character's off to the store going to get more fertilizer, Lee and JJ get picked up by the army and they're interrogated. Now, naturally they don't know anything about this. And for me, it felt like it was just working with the trope, but it was a trope that's worked well in the past, so might as well just stick with it. So the G-Man basically interviews them and says, well, what do you know about this worm? Well, obviously they don't know anything about it. They don't know what's causing it. And then they get gassed because apparently the U.S. Army is paranoid about these guys probably spraying information about a worm, even though it's a giant worm that pops out and everybody's seen it. So it cuts back to the job site at night, where I've returned with the fertilizer, mixed up everything, and then the army shows up. The army then's like, well, you need to step away from this place, you're under arrest too. Then the worm pops out, and I've already set off the ignition for the fertilizer and everything, and we basically kill the worm, falls down dead, and then Lee says, oh, hey, you need any more help? Give us a ring, and he hands the general a business card. It's just a brief summary. So in terms of the what am I trying to say here? I'm drawing a blank. But in terms of the show, it's just basically trying to create something that's a bit unique. I guess sort of Rick and Morty-ish, but not being Rick and Morty. So why the worm? Well, for this one, there are a lot of different options for monsters. So I'd written a few episodes about giant octopuses, dragons, giant robots, that kind of stuff, but I felt I really didn't want to make it too extravagant, and I felt going with any of the other options might have been a bit too much. So I figured, a giant worm is it's pretty big, but it's not going to be as extravagant or as dramatic as a dragon, for instance. Plus, when I was conceiving the idea for the panels, I kept imagining a giant worm popping out of the ground. I mean, that's not a euphemism for anything. I just, in my mind, and when I was doing the sketches, I just drew a giant worm popping out of the ground. So I figured, we'll just go with that. I mean, furthermore, the idea of an albino worm of monstrous proportions just popping out of the ground and destroying everything in sight, I sort of felt that could exist. It'd be, even if it was fantastical that it was a mutated worm, I felt that a giant worm would sort of be a bit more feasible than, say, a dragon in North Carolina. But in any case, I was pretty satisfied with just using that as the first quote-unquote villain or monster, just to get the Bushwackers started. And really, when it comes to using a giant worm, I felt they really aren't used as often as main villains, because most of the time when you're dealing with giant creatures, you're talking about kaiju level monsters from the deep like Godzilla or Rodan or Mothra, but you never really see anything with giant worms, and I thought, that might be fun to use. Plus, it was a bit silly too, because usually when you think of a giant creature attacking people, you don't really think, oh, a worm. It's kind of odd. Why would you have a giant worm? I mean, surely you think of something more spectacular, but for the first episode, I didn't want it to be too dramatic. I wanted it to be sort of innocuous, but at the same time a little bit fantastical. So that's the reason why I went with a worm. Now, will it ever return? Well, I have written a few stories about the return of a giant worm, but I think for the time being, it's one of those things where, you introduce the monster, it's a one-time thing, and you kind of move on to the next thing. So if it's popular, and if I can find another story to sort of, work the worm into, I might, but but really for season 1, I kind of feel like you just, for the most part, most of your villains are going to be just one and done. Sort of follow the whole villain or monster of the week paradigm in terms of how the stories are set up. And we'll and I'll definitely cover more of those as we do more of the breakdowns for other episodes to come. So, in terms of the episode, usually when I write the scripts are really, really short. The average length is between 5 to 6 or 7 pages. But but really, when you animate and when you record and put everything together, it's actually much longer, which comes as a surprise to me. But at the same time, I feel like it's a fairly good good length in terms of story, because on average a 5 or 6 page script can get you between 15 to 20 minutes, because what you also got to keep in mind is there's apart from a lot of action and dialogue, you have to storyboard and block out how you want your shots or how you want the scene to look. And I mentioned it before, I mean, you're also including a lot of sound effects, a lot of pauses, dramatic effects for dialogue and all that stuff. So, I mean, if I were to write, I don't think I've ever written a story more than maybe 12 pages. I think 13 pages might have been the longest I've ever written. But usually I try to keep it between 5 to 8 pages, just because it's much easier for me to put together and get out in a timely manner. And I feel like if I do it between overall, if the episode's between 15 to 20 minutes, I feel like that's a pretty good length to kind of get, the gist of the story conveyed to the viewer. Speaking of which, there should be more of you viewers out there. So definitely like, comment, subscribe, and definitely share the video with other people, because, I put a lot of work into them. So why North Carolina? Why set them in North Carolina? Well, that's pretty easy. I live in North Carolina. I know about North Carolina. I used to, back in middle school and high school, I created a series called The Amstel Guys, which was set in New York. And at that time I thought, well, all the good shows are set in New York, all the movies are set in New York. New York is a pretty dramatic place to put all your stories in. But there was always a bit of a disconnect, just because I never really knew anything about it, just apart from what I've seen on TV. And a person who's lived in New York, or who lives in New York, has a better understanding of how things work over there, and has a bit more familiarity than someone who hasn't lived there. And I felt it was a bit disingenuous, so I decided, you know what, I'm just going to set it in North Carolina. And I'm kind of glad that I did, because North Carolina, at least for me, is one of the states that you don't really hear too much from. I think the only time North Carolina actually made it in the news was with the whole bathroom bill from a few years ago. But that kind of had a negative effect on us, because a lot of businesses kind of, gave us the stink eye because of that. So, so having lived in North Carolina all my life, and having gone to school here, I lived in Charlotte and Greensboro. There are aspects and parts of North Carolina that I figure, you know what, there's a lot more that you can do with it. I can sort of see the appeal of trying to, maybe set a story here or there. And a lot of stuff that I've written are, they are set in North Carolina. And for me, North Carolina's home, more importantly. But why set the story in North Carolina? Because it's familiar territory. I know where everything is. I know what makes sense, and also I think it's kind of interesting to kind of give the state a weird bent to it. Because there aren't that many shows set in North Carolina apart from the Andy Griffith Show, which was set in Mayberry. But I didn't want to create a fictional town or anything. I figured, we just might have it set, take place in Charlotte. And Charlotte's not a fictional city at all; it's a real place. So really, for me, just setting in North Carolina and giving it that weird angle, hopefully, there might be a meme somewhere called, hashtag keep North Carolina weird, that sort of thing. So, and it also fits in with the entire idea of the Bushwackers, because, at a microcosm level, the Bushwackers are three ordinary guys who are thrust into these extraordinary adventures. North Carolina's in an ordinary state that just happens to find itself the stage for these extraordinary adventures. So it just works perfectly, really. There's really nothing else I can say on the matter on that. So, those superpowers, any plans for these guys to get superpowers? No. I've said it before and I'll say it again. I feel like it's too easy to just give these guys superpowers and they go around, fixing things that way. Now, I can see the comedy in that. I can definitely see how funny that would be, but I just think it's just too easy. And I know if these guys get superpowers, for example, they can meet on more fantastical and more powerful villains, but I feel like it's a bit of a cop-out. For me, I think it's much funnier and much more of a challenge to see three ordinary guys take on, I don't know, a supervillain, with heat vision. How are they going to defeat someone like that? It's much more interesting to write, really, and I'm sort of influenced by Greek mythology too, because I used to read a lot of Greek mythology as a kid. And what fascinated me is the fact that you had these ordinary heroes who would go out and meet these extraordinary challenges and try to figure out how to deal with them, like Heracles or Hercules and his 12 labors, or Theseus or Bellerophon or Perseus, an ordinary man who's aided by the gods to kill Medusa and defeat the Kraken and save the Princess Andromeda. So there's a bit of a classical mythological element to it, because it's this idea that the ordinary man, doesn't need superpowers, doesn't really need the intervention of the divine to help out, but by using their wits and using the powers of observation, they can find a way to, bring the extraordinary down a peg. It sort of reminds me of the Lovecraftian model too, how you have these ordinary people coming up against these cosmic horrors, and their victories are short-lived, because how can mere men defeat something extraordinary? So there's that, there's that factor playing to it too. So that's just another aspect as well. Plus, let's not forget that these are three ordinary guys based on real people, and I always like to insert, a bit of mundane humor, references to movies, music, people, events, songs, that kind of stuff, just to make it a bit more realistic, but more lived in, if that makes sense as well. Which then brings me to the next point. So is it just going to be three guys, or are there going to be any additional people to the team? For right now, I'm happy to just keep it at three guys, just because I think three is a nice number. If there are any additional people, I think they'll just be temporary. Maybe we'll just have like a guest in later episodes, kind of like what you had with Batman the Brave and the Bold, where Batman would team up with with a superhero for particular adventure. Maybe something like that later on down the road, but I think the adventures of three guys is pretty sufficient, I think. And the cliffhanger too at the end, I think for me, cliffhangers can be both infuriating but also satisfying, because you're not really wedded to the idea of the definitive answer. You have something there, and people can sort of just figure out for themselves what's going to happen next. And a lot of the episodes that I've written, they're either on a cliffhanger, or there's a lot of things that don't get resolved and they never get mentioned again. I really like that device, because it shows that you're not wedded to one particular thing. You tell your story and you move on to the next one. Some people might say, well, that's just lazy writing, you lazy bastard, but I don't see anything wrong with it. I don't. If you do, just feel free to comment in the section below and I'll take a look at it, but I pretty much like writing it the way that I do. Let's see, what else? So, in terms of the episode breakdown, why did you write it the way that you did? I've thought of, usually when I think about an episode, I already have in my mind what the course of the story looks like. This is A, it goes to B, it goes to C, it goes to D, and then it goes to E, and it concludes at F, for instance. So I'll elaborate on this one. So, A starts out with the guys in Lee's apartment just putting up the ad for their business, which takes us to B, where you see the worm pop out, destroy things. So that establishes what will happen in point C, where the guys go to their first job and they find out, oh, this place has been damaged. What's causing it? go to D, they do some investigation and find the cavern full of, eggs, which takes us to E, or D, I'm losing track here, where they meet the monster, and then E takes us to the point of how do we solve this, and then F is the resolution. So usually when I write a story, I will follow that line of thinking. I try not to elaborate too much, and again, this goes back to the length of the episode, because I don't want to run it on too long. And personally, I'm not really a fan of doing B storylines. I just like to tell the story as it is. No gags or cutaways or anything like that. Just tell the story that you're going to tell, and what's the problem? What's the problem or the conflict? What's the solution? And how do they implement that resolution to solve the issue? It's I know it's a bit more of a simplified approach, and it's not sexy, for lack of a better word, because I think a lot of people kind of like to go with something more elaborate. I know Dan Harmon uses the hero's journey, and I applaud him for writing like that, but for me, it's just too much work, really. That's just a lot to put, to invest into that. Not to mention the fact that he's got a lot of other writers doing it, whereas it's just me. So I definitely do like to keep things pretty simple. I do like overarching story arcs, though. Story arcs are a huge thing for me. But I also don't like, doing an entire season where it's just one story, because I feel like people will be doing a lot of things besides this one little thing. That being said, there are future seasons where one season is just going to be devoted to this one storyline, but at the same time there are previous seasons or future seasons to come where the Bushwackers will do episodes concurrent to that main event. And I know it's a bit busy, but at the same time I feel like it's good to have options. I don't really like the idea of just having people do one thing for an entire season. Now, if people are just doing one thing per episode, that makes sense. And then you can have like an overarching theme where something will continually recur. I mean, the best example I can give is when Christopher Eccleston was Doctor Who, and you had the bad wolf motif. I thought that was brilliantly written. Because you have all these individual stories, but yet you're weaving this common element throughout, and that's sort of what I'm doing right now with season 1. Especially when you take a look at Preston the robot at the end, you see the guys from this secret society called Anubis, who find out what the Bushwhackers are doing, and they decide, these guys are kind of interesting. Let's see what else we can do with them. But again, we'll dive, deeper into that when we do a breakdown of, I think that's like episode 12 or something. I gotta take a look at the list. Just to go back, I really like to keep my story structure simple, just because I don't want to put too much in terms of dialogue. I like to keep everything, close, straight to the point. This dialogue relates to that. Now, if there are any deviations, usually it's, maybe it's for a few lines or so, but then it always circles back to the main point. I really can't understand, or I should say, I really don't understand why some writers would just go off and deviate into different points and never get anywhere. And some of y'all will probably know what I'm talking about. Family Guy is a big offender, I think. Now, nothing against Seth MacFarlane. I applaud him for what he's done, but I feel like a lot of those gags, they just go nowhere. They don't do anything. They don't advance the story. They don't add anything to the story at all. They're just there. In my mind, I feel like every character, every dialogue, every shot has to fight for the right to earn its place in the script, so that they can be in the show. If it's not worth anything, why would it be there? But again, that's just my philosophy when it comes to that kind of stuff. I mean, the guys at Family Guy and American Dad, they can do whatever they want, but for me, it's all about just sticking to the point. So, let's see. Starting to run out of things to say here. This is the first time I'm actually doing a breakdown of my own episode, so bear with me. And thank you again so much for watching or listening. I really do appreciate that. So in terms of the characters, I feel like the less characters you have, the better. I mean, so really, in this particular case, your main characters are the Bushwackers, those three, and the General. Those are your main characters, and then you have all the backup characters, like the guy who owned the house, the FBI agent who interrogated them. I mean, for me, again, it goes back to the whole concept of script length. Just having too many characters makes things confusing, I think. And again, going back to the point I mentioned earlier, it's about it's making sure that every character that's in the story is integral and advances the story, advances the plot. They're not just there for the sake of being there. And again, I can't, sometimes I can't fathom how you can have like a huge cast of characters. Now, if you do have like a massive universe, it's great. But for me, I sort of feel like you want to introduce them or weave them in with subtlety, very carefully, very slowly. You don't just dump them all in. I know, because I used to read a lot of Shakespeare, and it's phenomenal how many characters are in a play, and I feel like things just get confusing, because then you don't know, because then you lose track and you don't know who's saying what or who's doing what. So in this particular case, I kind of like to have everybody just the number of characters just at a minimum, so I know what everybody's doing and what their role is and what their particular contribution to the episode is. And then all the background characters, really, they're just there for the background scene. Like the Tin Men of Oz or the robot vampires. Again, we'll dive a little bit more into that in future episodes. Really, the only other thing I can say is that is that in terms of this particular episode, why are they out to destroy this giant worm? Couldn't they just let it go? Well, yeah, they could let it go, but but for me, I just thought, and it might be, some people might say it's lazy, but I think it might be interesting to see the solution that the Bushwhackers come up with to take down this monster that's destroying people's homes and lives. And it kind of ties in with the concept that they used in the Godzilla movies back in the 60s and 70s with Toho. With the concept that these creatures are a symbol of natural destruction, or a symbol of destruction, really. So you could look at it and see the worm as a symbol of our own self-destructive nature. And the Bushwhackers destroying the creature is basically us as a collective trying to repress that self-destructive nature by destroying it and denying its existence. But that's if you're really overthinking it, kind of like me. But back to the main point: why destroy this giant worm? Well, I mean, it goes back to the concept of introducing a new monster or new villain every episode. it's also easy, but also at the same time, it kind of just, I do have a flair for the dramatic, and I feel like what's the best and easiest way to deal with it? By blowing it up. That's pretty much the gist of it right there. And honestly, I don't know how exactly you can, preserve that thing. I know in Star Trek the Horta is rescued, but Star Trek is more of an ideal society, or a show about the ideal society, whereas the Bushwackers, well, it's just about 3 idiots who seem to have a bizarre obsession with pyromania. I have a bizarre obsession with fire, so I guess that sort of leaks into the story right there. But yeah, that's pretty much what I've got. If you have any other questions or any comments about the episode, feel free to leave them in the comments below, and I'll take a look at them, and we can start a discussion, or I can do a second breakdown episode or address them in a later episode. So yeah, that's pretty much it on that front. So that's basically the first breakdown, I guess, of the entire series. So there will be more Bushwackers breakdowns over the next few weeks. So remember to like, comment, subscribe, and please share this video with your family and friends. Spread the word, and I will be producing more series and more episodes. Season 2 will probably premiere sometime around late spring, so just be on the lookout for that. Thanks for watching. Have a great day, and bye.